So, good morning all of you. Welcome you all to the botany online classes. Today in this video we are going to discuss about the process of sexual reproduction, in which we are going to discuss about the pollination process. Okay. In the previous sections we had discussed about the development of male gametophyte, development of female gametophyte. So in this video we are going to complete the process of pollination, and in this way all the events of pre-fertilization process will be completed. Okay, so let us start. As far as pollination is concerned, as the name suggests, it is a transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma. You know that anthers are found in your male reproductive part of the flower, that is your stamens, and stigma is found at the tip of your female reproductive part, that is your pistil or gynoecium, isn't it? So the process in which the pollen grains which are formed in the anther are transferred to the stigma is called as the pollination. As far as pollination is concerned, it can be divided into two categories, that is your self-pollination and cross-pollination. Now let us start self-pollination. Well, self-pollination involves transfer of pollen grains from anthers to stigma of the same flower or another flower borne by the same plant. Okay, so self-pollination can be divided into two categories. One is autogamy and second one is Dichogamy. So first come to autogamy. Autogamy, in case of autogamy, here the stigma of a flower is pollinated by its own pollen. Okay, so in case of a bisexual flower, there is presence of both the stamens as well as carpels. So here in case of autogamy, the stigma of a flower is pollinated by the pollen grains formed by its own anther. Got it? And examples where the autogamy is found, it includes pea, wheat and rice. So you can quite easily understand it by drawing the diagram. Well, let me show you. Let it be the bisexual flower. Okay, so this is the carpel. Now this one is the stigma, then this one is the style, and this one is the ovary. Here, as it is a bisexual flower, here also you can also find what? Your stamens. In case of stamens, there are presence of what? Your anthers. Then this one is the filament. In the anther, there are presence of pollen grains. So pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the same flower, isn't it? So in this case, we call it as autogamy. Got it? Now come to the second one, that is Dichogamy. What happens in Dichogamy? Here, transfer of pollen grains occurs from one flower to another flower borne by the same plant. Okay. Now, as far as what is the basic difference between the autogamy and Dichogamy? Here, in case of autogamy, the pollination was occurring in case of the same flower, that is a bisexual flower, but here there are presence of separate flowers, that is male flower and female flowers are separate, but both the male flowers and female flowers are present or borne by the same plant. Okay, within a same plant there is a separate male flower and there is a separate female flower. So from the male flower, the pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the female flower present in the same plant. It's a characteristic feature of your Dichogamy. Got it? Now let us come to the adaptations found in case of self-pollination. In other cases, you can see in the in your book it is written contrivances for self-pollination. Okay, so what are the adaptations found in case of self-pollination? Two adaptations are found. One is homogamy and second one is Claystogamous. Okay, so what does homogamy mean? Homogamy means here the anthers and stigma, they mature at the same time. So in case of a bisexual flower, there are presence of stamens as well as your carpels. So both stamens and carpels, they mature at the same time. Okay, by saying stamens and carpels, I mean anthers in case of stamens and stigma in case of your carpels. Okay, so here anthers and stigma, they mature at the same time, as a result of which pollen grains of a flower can easily pollinate the stigma of the same flower. Got it? So it's a characteristic feature of Mirabilis and Catharanthus. Got it? Then second one is Claystogammy. In case of Claystogammy, the flowers do not open even at maturity till pollination is completed. Okay, that means here it is a bisexual flower, and bisexual flower is not opening till the pollination occurs, that is, it is being pollinated by the pollen grains of the same flower, because it has not yet opened. If at all it opens, then there is a chance that pollen grains from another plant may come or might come and reach the stigma. But here the flower is not opening till the pollination is completed. Got it? Example is oxalis and balsam. Okay. These are the characteristics of your Claystogamous flowers. So for your entrance point of view, you remember, like Claystogamous flower, there are also flowers called Chasmogamous flower. In that case, what are those Chasmogamous flowers? These flowers open, okay, when mature and expose their anthers and stigma to the environment. So in that case, those flowers are Chasmogamous flowers. But Chasmogamous flowers are not characteristic feature of self-pollination because they open before pollination. Okay, but here in case of Claystogamous flowers, these flowers do not open even after maturity till the pollination is completed. Now come to the advantages of self-pollination. So what are the advantages of self-pollination? Well, it maintains purity of species. That means as no other individuals are involved in it, that is, pollen grains of the same plant or same flower is being involved, so purity of species, that same characters can be maintained. Got it? Then another important advantage is that it is not dependent on any pollinating agent, like the cross pollination. There a pollinating agent is a must for the pollination to happen, but here no pollinating agent is required. Got it? Then as it is occurring inside the same flower, so there is no chance of wastage of pollen grains, isn't it? So relatively less number of pollen grains are required for this self-pollination to occur, as there is no wastage of pollen grains. Got it? Now come to the disadvantages of self-pollination. There are some advantages, but also there are some disadvantages. What are the disadvantages? Well, continuous pollination, self-pollination results in loss of vigor. Okay, so as a result of which your upcoming progenies or the next generations, they start to become weaker. Okay, as new characters are not being introduced here, new genes are not being introduced here, as a result of which the progenies become weaker and weaker. Okay, so vigor and vitality decreases. Then another important disadvantage is that new characters are not getting introduced. Got it? And the third most important disadvantage of self-pollination is that adaptability to changing environmental condition also decreases. Okay, so these are some of the advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination. So till now we have studied about what is pollination, then what are the different types of pollination, that is your self and cross. Then your self-pollination was again divided into two categories, autogamy and Dichogamy. Then what are the adaptations of self-pollination, advantages of self-pollination and disadvantages of self-pollination. So before coming to the pollination chapter, you must know the flower structure, and that I have already told you in one of the video. So you must remember the flower structure. That means what are stigma, what are styles, what are ovary, then what is anther, what is filament, what forms on the anther. Okay, so these are very important things, rather I should say simple things that you must know before entering into the chapter of the self-pollination. Got it? So now we come to an end as far as self-pollination is concerned. Now let us come to the second type of pollination, that is your cross-pollination. In case of cross-pollination, here transfer of pollen grains occurs from anther of one flower to stigma of another flower borne by another plant. Okay, that means there are presence of two plants involved here. One plant is producing pollen grains and another plant is receiving pollen grain. Okay, that means here transfer of pollen grains is occurring from one plant to another plant, or rather we should say from one anther of one flower to stigma of another flower. Okay, so this is also called as xenogamy or allogamy. Cross pollination is also called as xenogamy or allogamy, and as it involves two different plants, obviously pollinating agents are absolutely essential for bringing about the process of cross pollination. Okay, it usually occurs in case of unisexual flowers. Obviously there is no way that unisexual flowers can involve self pollination. It is not at all possible. So as a rule, you can say that cross pollination is a must in case of unisexual flowers. But also bisexual flowers, some of the bisexual flowers also show cross pollination. I mean, the most easy way to say that bisexual flowers means self-pollination, because it is very much easier. But there are some plants which are, even though bisexual, they show cross-pollination. So in that case, some kind of adaptations must be out there in those flowers or in those plants, as a result of which, instead of self-pollination, cross-pollination is occurring. So we will see that as far as the adaptations of your cross-pollinated plants. These adaptations include dichogamy or unisexuality. Second one is self-sterility. Third one is dichogamy. Fourth one is hercogamy. And fifth one is heterostylene. So we will go one by one. First one is dichogamy or unisexuality. What is that? Here there is presence of separate male and female flowers. Okay, that is obviously the main thing for cross pollination. That is, separate male and separate female flowers means there is very little chance of your self pollination. Well, you have been taught in the previous section that your self pollination can be autogamy and Dichogamy, isn't it? Autogamy is okay, bisexual flower, they are the self pollination occurring. But what about Dichogamy? Dichogamy means in a single plant there are separate male and female flowers. There the transfer of pollen grains was occurring, isn't it? Even though there the transfer of pollen grains were occurring in case of Dichogamy, still then it is considered as self-pollination. Why? Because male and female reproductive parts, or you can say the male and female gametes, they belong to the same plant. Okay, same parent, so the Dichogamy can be called as your self-pollination. But here basically your cross-pollinating individuals, they are most probably dioecious. That is, male and female flowers are borne by two separate plants. Okay, male and female flowers are borne by two separate plants, as in case of papaya and mulberry. In case of monoecious plants also, you can say that separate male and female flowers are found. So they sometimes are included under your cross pollination, but basically they shouldn't be included under cross pollination because the gametes are of the same plant. Got it? So dichogamy is an adaptation as far as your cross pollination is concerned. Now second one is self-sterility. Here pollen grains of a flower are sterile to its own stigma. Okay, the pollen grains of a flower, if it is a bisexual flower, it cannot pollinate its own stigma. So cross pollination is absolutely essential. Got it? So example found in case of petunia, then potato, tobacco. These are the examples where self-sterility is found. Thus cross-pollination is favored. Then third one is dichogamy. It is another adaptations found in case of a cross-pollinated plants. What does that mean? Here stamens and carpels, they mature at different times. Okay, can you remember in the self-pollination adaptation we had discussed about homogamy? Homogamy means your stamens and carpels, they mature at the same time, but here just the opposite one. Here stamens and carpels, they mature at different times. Okay, on that basis there are two types, protandry and protogyny. What does that mean? Protandry means here stamens mature before maturity of the carpel. Okay, and protogyny means here the carpels mature before maturity of the stamens, just the opposite one. So protandry and protogyny. Examples of protandry are cotton, sunflower, and protogyny are banyan, people tree, and custard apple tree, where you generally found you will have an idea about protogyny in these plants. Okay, now come to next one, that is Hercogami. Okay, it's a very important one. Hercogami means if there is presence of physical barrier between stamens and carpels. So if physical barrier is found between stamens and carpels, obviously self-pollination will be prevented and cross-pollination will be favored. Okay, so what kind of physical barrier would be found? Well, as far as you can see that in case of Crucifery and Caryophyllaceae family, the style is very long. Okay, style which bears stigma at its tip, it is very long. You know that pollination involves transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma. Now as the style is long and it bears stigma at a much more bigger height, which is far beyond the reach of the stamens. Stamens are shorter in these cases, as a result of which the pollen grains that is formed in the anther, tip of the stamens, anthers, that do not reach the stigma, as a result of which here cross-pollination is favored. Now there is another example in case of gloriosa. Okay, here stamens are extrose and the dehiscence is not likely to allow pollen grains to land on the stigma. Okay, they are facing towards the outer side in case of gloriosa stamens. Okay, so here cross-pollination is favored. Now another adaptations is heterostyle, the last adaptation. Well, as far as heterostyle means, hetero, that means different. Here style is oriented in such a manner that it doesn't receive pollen of its own flower. Okay, let us know that in a simple way you can say that here length of the style differs in individuals of the same species. That means in one species, if one individual of the species, if style is of certain length, in another individual of the same species style is of different length. Okay, that means two individuals of the same species, here the style length is different. Okay, example in case of primula and oxalis. So what does that happen? So let us see. In one type of, in this case in heterostylic condition, in one type of plant, all the flowers have long styles. Okay, long styles. Again I am reminding you, styles means here at the tip stigma is found. So all styles, if one flower is having long styles, the anthers are located below the stigma. That means the stamens are shorter. Okay, styles are long, stamens are shorter. Whereas in other type of flowers of the same species, just the opposite thing happens. Short styles and long stamens. That means short styles and the anthers are above the stigma. Got it? So when the insect comes, the mouth parts of an insect thrust into short styled flower, okay, and come in contact with the anthers and get covered with pollen. Okay, now if this insect now enters a long styled flower, the pollens are deposited upon the stigma. which is located at the same level as the anthers in a short styled flower. Similarly, pollen adhering to the mouth parts of the insect that has visited a long styled flower get deposited upon the stigma of a short styled flower, which is at the same level in the corolla tube as the anthers of the long styled flower. Okay, so in this way the cross pollination occurs, but here self pollination is also not prevented. Why? Because an insect, while withdrawing its mouth parts from the corolla tube of a long styled flower, may occasionally transfer pollens from the anther to stigma of the same flower. So you cannot say that in heterostylic condition cross pollination is a rule. There is also a chance of self pollination. So now, till now we have quite an idea about the process of cross-pollination and what are the adaptations of cross-pollination. That is unisexuality, self-sterility, then Hercogami, heterostyle, isn't it, Dichogamy. So these are the adaptations of cross-pollination. Now let us know what are the advantages of cross-pollination. The most important advantage is that as two individuals are involved in it, new characters are introduced. Definitely new characters would be introduced, and the adaptability to the new environmental condition also increases. But it was just the opposite in case of self-pollination. No new characters can be introduced as a single individual was involved, and your ability to adapt to new environmental condition decreases in case of self-pollination, but here it increases. Then there must be some disadvantages also in case of cross-pollination. What are those disadvantages? Well, as far as cross-pollination is concerned, it is dependent on external agencies. Got it? And less economical. It is less economical, cross-pollination, because there is huge wastage of pollen grains as external agencies are involved. As wastage is more, so the plants have to produce more amount of pollen grains. So it is less economical. And it is another disadvantage is that in addition to some useful characters, some undesirable characters may also get introduced. Okay, so this is the most important disadvantage of cross pollination. So I think it is helpful for you, it will be helpful for you in understanding the process of pollination. And remember one thing, we had in the first class of the sexual reproduction in case of angiosperms discussed that the process of sexual reproduction has been divided into 3 steps. That is pre-fertilization, fertilization and post-fertilization. So pre-fertilization events include development of male gametophyte, development of female gametophyte, and pollination. So this is what the pollination, the process of pollination concludes the pre-fertilization events. Okay. So we hope that we will meet again in another video, and I would be keen to explain the process of sexual reproduction, that is post-fertilization events that occur in case of angiospermic plant. Thank you.